groups and discuss music selection for their final project, which is this basically a choreography. I'm calling it contrast dance designing. I'm taking the word choreography out of it a little bit, just in case that's intimidating. But so each group will pick a selection of music. It could be anything they want. And they will also, I think I describe it a little bit more detail, this assignment in a way that I can say it. Well, they'll create a contra dance that they can teach. They can do it themselves as a group, and then they can teach to the rest of the class. You know, add as many couples as they need to, and they can perform it. They have to name it. They have to give it a name, because all these old ones have funny, funny names like Miss Arnold's Delight, Brisk Young Lads,
Wow.
Miss Parker's Fancy, etc. So based on a lot of the reading they will do, they'll be exposed to a lot of the old-fashioned names and a lot of the more current things that people are naming things. And so that's their project, which now they have many weeks to work on. But we'll talk about that. Week 8, they're back in the studio, and they can begin working on their group work. And I'm going to have the guest caller and musician back in the studio to assist them to kind of get launched into those group works. In the classroom, we'll watch a video called What's Not to Like, a community contra dance, which is something I found at the Performing Arts Library that is also more from the musician's perspective, but it's all these talking heads, people who had never done anything physical in their life, and now they contra dance every week. And that was an interesting perspective, because I'm hoping some of these students aren't very particularly physical people to begin with, and that this will be a transformative experience, not to teach them to be dancers, but to engage in something physical in a community. We watch a couple of YouTube videos, and then we read a chapter in the bigger book called Integrating Newcomers, which talks about what happens if you go to a contra dance you've never done it before. They'll be given some in-class group work time. They have a writing assignment due, which is to pick a hypothetical community that would benefit from learning contra dance and write a 500-word article for an imaginary publication that they have to name, like a journal or something. Week 9, they in the studio they work on their group things. In the classroom, we watch something called Dancing with Dudley, which is about Dudley Laufman. He's a well-known caller, and we go on a contra dance field trip. So there's no reading assignments. Week 10, some studio work time, and then that's I'll just jump ahead. That's the classroom time is talking about contra dance and its influence on, just like Meg did on concert dance film, and we watch some Mark Morris excerpts, and we watch the party scene from Rodeo. We watch Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, the barn raising dance. A lot of things where these line dances were informing various things. And students will discuss contra dance and its influence. Week 11 is when we start watching the final group showings in the studio. That's the first group does it. And in the classroom, we continue to talk about gender, about style, about the individual and the community. There's another reading about that. And they're assigned to look up local contra dance events online, looking for variety, diversity, and rhetoric describing each setting in its community, and they'll make a list to share with people. Like the idea is like, we love this so much, let's go do it every week. That's kind of what I'm hoping. Students will discuss how their definitions of community have changed since the first in-class writing, and themes of the semester's readings will be revisited. Week 12, more group showings in the studio, classroom, we'll exchange those lists and we'll review notes. We're wrapping up a lot of ideas. And week 13, the last group show, and then in the classroom, the students will discuss what it was like to make those dances and to teach them and to learn them and reflect upon the community that's been built throughout the semester. And then they have to hand in their final journals, and then the last day is a party, a contra dance party. So I think I hit all the writing assignments. I kind of did them as we went through, and yeah, I felt it was a little challenging to find films that were varied enough so that you weren't just watching people doing very similar activities over and over again. So the ones to me that kind of popped out were the ones where the editorial of the individual participants were kind of meatier and a little more, but in a lot of the writing, there's a lot of very exaggerated commentary about you know, and oh, I know what I wanted to say. This one, the gender one, as well as the longer book that I downloaded, are both written from a dance ethnographer point of view, and that's something I wanted to be able to teach the students too. Like, what is that? What kind of profession is that, and why is that interesting? And I didn't really add any other readings about that. I know I could have done something based on other things we've done in this course, you know, how to understand what going out in the field is, doing field notes, all of that. I think I could have used that somewhere, but I didn't really write it into the syllabus, so I just wanted to add that. I think that's it. Oh yeah, I can kind of plow through there, but
I was interested in, you give kind of the trajectory of like the early stages of it and now the current trends, but it's all in America, correct?
Yeah.
It didn't originate anywhere else?
Well, it originated in England and France, and I'm sure there's contra dancing done in Amsterdam and other places like, but I didn't put that in this. I really wanted, it's American contra dance.
Do you think it's important to give credit where it came from? Or?
Well, I do, within the history. Oh, yeah. No, the first 3 or 4 readings are all about England and France and colonialism, and, you know, I think it's in there. I think I do give it.
I was just confused because I read some of it with learning about tango, and I couldn't figure out where it was coming from.
Right.
Because it seemed like it was in folk and sort of all over the place. And
yeah, I mean, I think, even in something as short as this 1-page preface to this book, that's about all the original or early writings I was finding were just like that. Once upon a time, this happened, and then this happened, and now people are still doing it. It's kind of, and both of these longer articles, I mean, this person in particular says, it is difficult to describe an authoritative linear history of contra dance, and that, you know, they all apologize for not having enough material. It's interesting. These are the scholars saying, I wish there were more writings. And so I didn't feel so bad once I found that if these people writing their PhDs don't have enough material, then I'm okay. But yeah, I feel like for a class like this, the historical overview would be pretty complete. But really, we're talking about America.
Yeah. And then with the music, you were saying that there's quite a bit of freedom. Was it always like that, or was there a specific score that was going with these, or?
Every dance had its own tune.
Okay.
And depending upon the era that you're talking about, whether you're talking, and I didn't even address the 60s and 70s folk revival, which was really where in America, or the 30s and 40s, and there was a square dance initiative that Henry Ford sort of propagated. Yeah, like, you know, and then it became a gym class thing, and square dancing kind of was an offshoot of contra dance. They're not the same thing, but they're very similar, and they share a lot of vocabulary. I didn't really talk about that, but in the readings, I feel like we've got a pretty strong, and I do overlap history into the first 3 weeks. I don't just knock it off in the first week. It keeps coming back. So, but I'm sorry, the music question. I think all those music readings really talk about it.
Okay.
Yeah, I just waffled through it myself. But it used to be very traditional music, and now, you know, there are people that are doing sort of new folk, new old-timey. I mean, there's lots of hyphenated names for all these things. But I thought it would be fun in the 21st century if someone wanted to do a contra dance to a Lady Gaga song. That would be totally fine to me. Like, I feel like, you know, or whatever, you know. I picked her.
3 minutes.
I was also, just kind of struck in this article by them talking about Dorothea, the past one, like contra dance is a distinctly American form, even though having these kind of English and European roots. And I was curious if any of the readings just went into that further in terms of like how.
Why it's an American form?
Well, or just kind of like what in it changed that made it this thing that could kind of be the symbol of new American.
Well, the main thing that changed is, I think Ken was asking, and I would have to look at this further, but I don't think it stuck anywhere else in a way that was as substantial as here, and again, it became kind of it went from being a court related thing, and something that the wealthy people did, and English. There's actually an English country dancing culture here in America where people dress in period costumes, and they dress in period costumes. They're stuck in time. They do it only to that music, and I think when it kind of was revived in the 60s and 70s, and anti-Vietnam, protesters start, like, what can we do to come together to be? I mean, there was a real hippy dippy kind of component to it, but.
Because I was thinking early.
Yeah, earlier than that. I don't know. That's a good question, and I'd want to kind of read between the lines. No, not specifically, because I feel like a lot of them kind of touch on it just in one way. They say because it is, because it did, which is, and you read that at face value.
And then I guess I was also thinking, I don't even remember where I've read, but knowing there was like a slave influence on the music, and that slaves would be musicians at events like this.
I did not read anything about that.
Okay, I don't know where I heard of it. Just that would distinctly influence the music in a different way as well. Different instruments.
Right. Yeah, that was something that never came up in any one of these readings.
How that would be dealt with in terms of just
in terms of race and
who's doing what and whatnot. Yeah,
that would have to be investigated, but it didn't come up in any of my readings. So.
I found it fascinating, the whole part about the kind of nerd factor.
The nerd factor is very high
in terms of just it being a form that tends to attract people that aren't necessarily socially.
Well, it's and there's a whole part in one of these other things that was about introverts too, and introverts being drawn to contra dancing and yeah. I mean, I think that we could probably touch on that in that week where we're talking about how do you feel and how's it making you feel. There's enough talk about eye contact and various things you do or don't do. It's all, I think all of
I
that's
love how
really
this went into like how each person smells different when you're kind of
Yeah,
confronted
there's
with
the